whenever you're buying properties, run it past a stamp duty land tax expert, because more often than not, stamp duty land tax is a massive area, and we do a lot of work in SDLT. So I thought I would quickly cover some of the things you ought to be aware of. Again, I'll qualify that I'm not covering every single thing, but some of the things we see quite often that I'm going to share with you, which I hope you'll find useful. If you are buying 2 or more properties from the same entity or from the same person, then you can claim multiple dwellings relief. Now, we don't need to go into the mechanics in terms of how that works, but if you're buying 2 properties, and let's say one is for say £500,000 and the other one is let's say for £150,000, then the SDLT on both of those is going to be at different levels, because they are exceeding different SDLT thresholds. But you can add the value of those properties together, divide them by 2, and then pay the SDLT on the average price. That using the example I've just shared with you right now, £500,000 and £150,000, you'll end up paying less stamp duty land tax overall. So if you're buying 2 or more properties, make sure you consider and think about multiple dwellings relief. Above and beyond that, if you are buying a property that has a granny annex or an additional property, usually a granny annex, but it could be an additional property on the grounds, then that may also qualify for multiple dwellings relief. So quite often we get people approaching us who've bought a new property as their main residence sometimes, and it had a granny annex. The solicitor didn't pick that up, and then we've gone back and made a reclaim for them using multiple dwellings relief. So keep an eye out for granny annexes. That is the common one. If you're buying a property which is uninhabitable, so these are properties, generally speaking, which have been empty or vacant for a very long time. They could have asbestos, they could have other forms of contamination, they might have some of the roof missing. If that is the case, then again there is a considerable stamp duty land tax saving on that. We do at least 4 to 6 cases at any one time on this, so this is very, very popular, and a lot of solicitors again miss out on this. So if you buy a property which you think might be uninhabitable, again come and speak to us. We'll happily look at it for you. I've just kind of touched on some of the points which may make it uninhabitable, and there are significant stamp duty land tax savings on that. If you are a property trader and you're buying property from probate, there's stamp duty land tax savings to be had there too. Again, we don't need to go into the mechanics. It's just to raise your awareness. If that ever happens, run it past me or another tax advisor, and they'll happily advise you. If you're buying from somebody who's relocating to a different country, there are, due to employment reasons, there's stamp duty land tax savings to be had there, so bear that in mind. If you're buying a property from a property developer and you're selling your current or existing property to them, kind of like a part exchange, again there's potential stamp duty land tax savings there to be had. If you buy a property which is mixed use, so if you're buying a shop on the ground floor and flats on the top floor, make sure you pay non-residential rate of stamp duty land tax. I've seen some solicitors miss out on that, and they make the buyer pay the additional 3%. You won't have to pay the additional 3%, but again, some solicitors miss out on that. If you are buying 6 or more properties in one go, then it's up to you to use one of 3 options. You can pay the standard rate of stamp duty land tax, you can pay the non-residential rates of stamp duty land tax, or you can use multiple dwellings relief. So if you're buying 6 or more in one go, do those calculations to see which one gives you the best outcome, and then obviously use that particular outcome. So those are some of the common things that are picked up in stamp duty land tax. There are many others which I haven't touched upon, So I guess the real lesson or takeaway for you is, whenever you're buying properties, run it past a stamp duty land tax expert, because more often than not there could be something there in terms of a saving to be had. A current one that we did not too long ago, we had somebody buying a property or buying a piece of land with a property on it, and with the property on the land, and the land had planning for, I think it was 12 houses, and if they were about to buy the property with the house on it, if they did that, they had to pay the additional 3% stamp duty land tax. I think the transaction was for, I think, 1.2 million. The number escapes my mind, but the stamp duty land tax came in at 128 odd thousand pounds. So we were able to structure the deal as such that the vendor, the person selling, would knock down the house, okay, themselves as part of the deal, and we would buy the land. It was a complicated structure, and I'm doing disservice to the transaction by kind of simplifying it for you, but just to kind of get the message across. So the house was knocked down by the vendor, the person selling, and my client was able to then just buy the piece of land, and they ended up paying, I think it was £55,000 in stamp duty. So 128,000 versus 55, a considerable stamp duty land tax saving. And in this particular case, they kind of came to us in the 11th hour, so we were still able to find a solution for them. That's just one example for you. But stamp duty land tax is very complicated. Unfortunately, it's also very misunderstood, and most accountants and most solicitors end up misunderstanding and therefore simplifying the rules and therefore misinterpreting. So this isn't Shaz Nawaz here having a bash at solicitors or accountants. I promise you, I respect and appreciate all the work that they do. This is just my attempt at enabling you to raise your awareness to say stamp duty land tax is not simple, it's complicated. Make sure you seek advice before you enter a transaction. And sometimes it might just be a plain vanilla transaction where you're buying an additional property and there's nothing going on. But if you run it past an expert, if there's nothing going on, they're not going to charge you to say to you, we can't help you. There's no, I've not come across an advisor who says, I can't help you, but can you pay me a fee for me telling you I can't help you? Okay, so always run it past an advisor. If they can't help, they're not going to charge you. So those are some of the SDLT factors. Vasuda says, can you claim back your SDLT if house was uninhabitable because of damp? Good question, Vasuda, and the answer is it depends. It depends on how much damp there is. If there's enough damp to make the property uninhabitable, then yes. Now, something which I forgot to cover earlier is some people sometimes think if the property doesn't have a kitchen or a bathroom, it's uninhabitable. That's correct. It's uninhabitable for mortgage purposes because you won't be able to obtain a mortgage, but unfortunately for tax purposes the threshold is higher. So if a property doesn't have a bathroom or a kitchen, that does not make it uninhabitable for tax purposes. It's not going to be mortgageable, but it's not uninhabitable for tax purposes. The threshold is much higher. So if you, let's say you end up buying a property, it has a significant amount of damp in it where it becomes uninhabitable. To answer Vasuda's question, you have 12 months from the date that you filed your stamp duty land tax return to amend your return. If you don't amend it within the 12 months, then we can go back to HMRC and put a case forward in terms of an error or omission was made. That is harder to do because if your solicitor files an incorrect tax return or SDLT return, it's difficult for us to argue that. However, last week we did do that for a client of ours, and I think he's expecting a £6,000 refund for SDLT, which was outside the 12-month window. So if you do it within the 12-month window, it's easier. Outside the 12-month window, it's harder. After 4 years, you can't do it anyway. So I hope that answers your question, Basuda. Yoko, what SDLT to pay if the downstairs is commercial and upstairs is residential? Then you would pay non-residential rates, Yoko. So you've said commercial, yeah, they're not commercial rates, but I know people within the world of property call it commercial rates. So you would pay non-residential rates and you wouldn't pay the additional 3%. Yeah. So what that basically means for you, Yoko, is you're going to end up paying less SDLT because you're not paying the additional 3%. John says, can we go back retrospectively to try and claim back SDLT in these cases? I think I'll cover that for you, John, when I answered Basuda's question. Imelda, I think it says Imelda, so forgive me if I haven't pronounced your name correctly. You buying 2 or more, does it have to be on the exact same time? What's the leeway interval? Well, it has to be at the same time, really. It has to be at the same time for you to claim multiple dwellings relief for that particular property. But if you bought the same property, if you bought 2 properties from the same person at different times, there is something else we could do. So if you want to email me or send me a message through Facebook, I can take that up with you. I'll need to ask you a few questions. So there are some other things that we could possibly do depending on the interval.